Hello, thinkers. Have you ever wondered why some people who've gone through a spiritual awakening seem too normal? Today, I'm going to reveal the strangest signs that indicate when your spiritual awakening has truly ended, and why this might be more disturbing than you imagine. I know it seems contradictory to talk about the end of awakening when we always hear it's an eternal journey. But Carl Jung discovered something fascinating. There is indeed a moment when the obsessive search ends, and that's when the real danger begins. We're living in an era of spiritual overload. Everyone is awakening, but few talk about what happens afterward. If you've ever felt lost after years of personal growth, or if you question whether you've truly evolved, this video is especially for you. The most dangerous moment of the spiritual journey isn't when you're lost, it's when you've finally arrived. Because when spiritual thirst disappears, something much deeper and more unsettling takes its place. Are you ready to discover what Jung really meant about the end of individuation? Picture this. You wake up one morning and realize you haven't meditated in weeks. You're not anxious about it. You're not guilty. You're not even thinking about getting back on track. This isn't spiritual laziness. This is something far more profound and, frankly, terrifying for most seekers. Jung called this the integration of the shadow. But what he really meant was this: you've stopped running from yourself. Think about it. How much of your spiritual journey was actually an elaborate escape plan? An escape from pain, from mundane reality, from the parts of yourself you couldn't accept. Here's what nobody tells you about spiritual seeking. It's often just sophisticated avoidance. We meditate to avoid feeling. We read spiritual books to avoid living. We attend retreats to avoid our actual relationships. But when the awakening process completes itself, something strange happens. You stop needing to seek because you've finally stopped running. This is where it gets psychologically uncomfortable. Your entire identity might have been built around being the seeker, the conscious one, the person on a journey. But what happens when the journey ends? Who are you when you're no longer becoming someone else? Jung understood that the psyche has its own intelligence. When you've truly integrated your shadow, those rejected parts of yourself, the compulsive need to fix or improve yourself naturally dissolves. You're not broken, so why keep trying to repair yourself? But here's the trap. This can look exactly like spiritual complacency. How do you tell the difference between genuine completion and just giving up? The answer lies in what replaces the seeking. When true integration occurs, obsessive seeking is replaced by spontaneous presence. You're not trying to be present, you just are. The hunter becomes the observer, not through effort, but through exhaustion of the hunt itself. Are you ready to discover what happens when even this observer dissolves? Here's where things get really uncomfortable. You know that secret superiority you felt when you got it and others didn't? That subtle satisfaction when someone was clearly unconscious while you were aware? Yeah, that's gone. And its absence is more unsettling than its presence ever was. Jung wrote about something he called participation mystique, the recognition that the boundary between self and other is largely illusory. But when this stops being a concept and becomes your lived reality, it's genuinely disturbing. You can no longer maintain the comfortable fiction that you're somehow separate from or superior to anyone else. Think about it. How much of your spiritual identity was built on being different from them? The unconscious masses, the materialistic people, the ones who just don't get it. When that hierarchical thinking dissolves, you lose one of the ego's favorite toys, the ability to feel special through comparison. This isn't about becoming a pushover or losing discernment. You still see clearly when someone is acting unconsciously, but here's the twist. You also see clearly how you've acted unconsciously countless times. You recognize the same patterns, the same fears, the same desperate attempts to feel significant that drive everyone's behavior, including your own. The psychological discomfort comes from losing what Jung called the spiritual persona, that carefully constructed image of being more evolved, more conscious, more awakened than others. When you can no longer maintain this persona because you genuinely don't feel superior, who are you? This is why many people unconsciously resist completing their awakening process. Being on the journey allows you to maintain the illusion of progress, of being special, of being different, but true completion dissolves these comfortable distinctions. You start seeing the divine comedy in human behavior, including your own, rather than the spiritual tragedy. Everyone is doing their best with their current level of awareness, just as you always have been. But this raises a disturbing question. If everyone is equally consciousness expressing itself, what makes your awakening special at all? This might be the most counterintuitive sign of all, and it's where most spiritual seekers get completely lost. You start enjoying things that your spiritual self used to judge. You get angry without immediately trying to transcend it. You feel petty jealousy, and instead of rushing to transform it, you just feel it. And somehow, this feels more authentic than years of trying to be above these emotions. Jung made a crucial distinction that most miss: wholeness versus perfection. The spiritual ego loves perfection. It's clean, it's controllable, it fits our image of what awakened should look like. But wholeness includes everything. Your shadow, your pettiness, your human desires, your moments of unconsciousness, all of it. Here's what's really happening. You're no longer at war with your humanity. Think about how much energy you've spent trying to be better than your natural impulses, trying not to feel anger, not to want material things, not to judge others, not to feel sexual desire, not to be lazy sometimes. This internal warfare was exhausting, wasn't it? When the awakening process completes, something radical happens. You give yourself permission to be human while remaining conscious. You can feel road rage and laugh at yourself for feeling it. You can want expensive things without guilt or the need to justify it spiritually. You can be moody, irrational, or petty without it threatening your sense of spiritual progress. If you're finding value in this perspective, I'd love for you to hit that like button. It helps other seekers find content that challenges conventional spiritual thinking. And if you're ready to explore more of Jung's radical insights about consciousness, consider subscribing for deeper dives into the psychology of awakening. But here's where it gets really interesting. This isn't spiritual regression. This is integration at its deepest level. You're not becoming less conscious. You're becoming more honest about what consciousness actually includes. Everything, even the parts you spent years trying to transcend. The question becomes, what if your humanity was never the obstacle to awakening, but the very vehicle for it? Here's a signal so subtle that most people miss it entirely. You stop looking spiritual. Your friends stop asking you for spiritual advice. People stop commenting on how zen or peaceful you seem. And the strangest part, you're perfectly fine with this invisibility. In fact, you prefer it. Jung understood that the persona, our social mask, extends into spiritual realms too. We develop what he called the spiritual persona, the image of being wise, peaceful, evolved. We learn the right words, adopt the right posture, cultivate the right energy. But when awakening truly completes, this persona becomes unnecessary because you're no longer performing spirituality. You're simply living it. Think about the difference between someone who's learned to act confident and someone who genuinely is confident. The person who's truly confident doesn't need to signal their confidence. It's just naturally present. Similarly, when consciousness has fully integrated, you don't need to signal your awakening because it's not separate from who you are anymore. This is psychologically challenging because we're used to getting validation for our spiritual progress. People used to seek you out for wisdom. They'd comment on your good energy. They'd ask what meditation technique you use or what books you recommend. But now, you blend in. You seem ordinary. The irony is profound. The more genuinely awakened you become, the less spiritual you appear to others. You're not constantly talking about consciousness or quoting spiritual teachers. You're not radiating that slightly artificial spiritual glow that comes from trying to embody peace. You're just naturally present, naturally responsive, naturally yourself. But here's what's really happening. You've stopped using spirituality as a way to feel special or different. The need to be seen as awakened has dissolved because the awakening is no longer something you have, it's something you are. This raises an uncomfortable question. How much of your spiritual journey was about genuine transformation versus social positioning? This is where things get truly confusing, even for seasoned spiritual seekers. You find yourself caring about mundane things again. You get excited about a new job, stressed about finances, invested in relationships in ways that your spiritual self might have called attachment. To outside observers, you might actually seem less evolved than you were during your peak-seeking phase. Jung called this the return of the transformed hero, but what he really meant was this. True transcendence doesn't mean escaping the world. It means engaging with it from a completely different foundation. The difference is invisible to most people, but it's everything. Here's what's actually happening. You're no longer using spirituality as an escape from life. During the seeking phase, many of us unconsciously used spiritual practices to avoid dealing with practical reality. Meditation became a way to avoid difficult conversations. Letting go became an excuse for not taking responsibility. Being present became a way to avoid planning for the future. But when awakening integrates fully, something remarkable occurs. You become more engaged with ordinary life, not less. You care about your work because you're no longer trying to prove you're above worldly concerns. You invest in relationships because you're no longer afraid that caring too much will compromise your spiritual detachment. This is where many people get confused and think they're regressing. They see themselves getting emotionally involved in mundane things and panic that they're losing their spiritual progress. But Jung understood that this reintegration is actually the completion of the process, not its failure. The awakened person doesn't transcend the world by leaving it. They transcend it by fully inhabiting it without the neurotic patterns that once drove their behavior. You're still in the game, but you're no longer playing from fear, ego, or the need to prove anything. Think about it. What if the ultimate spiritual achievement isn't rising above human concerns, but engaging with them from a place of genuine freedom? What if coming back down the mountain is actually the hardest part of the journey? Something profound shifts when you realize that everything you thought was the destination was actually just preparation. All those years of seeking, all those breakthrough moments, all those spiritual highs and integration periods, they were training wheels. And now, for the first time, you're riding without them. Jung spent his entire career studying what he called individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are. But here's what most people miss. He never said this process ends. What ends is the desperate, compulsive quality of the seeking. What begins is something far more mysterious, living as consciousness itself, moment by moment, without a map. This is simultaneously liberating and terrifying. During the seeking phase, you had goals: enlightenment, peace, awakening, integration. These gave your spiritual life structure and meaning. But when those goals are naturally fulfilled, what drives you forward? What gives your life direction when you're no longer trying to become someone else? The answer is both simple and profound. Life itself becomes the teacher. Not life as something to transcend or escape from, but life as the very expression of consciousness exploring itself through your unique perspective. Every interaction, every challenge, every moment of joy or sorrow becomes a fresh opportunity for consciousness to know itself more deeply. But here's the twist that Jung understood. This isn't a passive process. You don't just coast on your awakening. Instead, you become an active participant in consciousness's own evolution. You're no longer trying to get somewhere spiritually. You're helping consciousness discover new possibilities through your lived experience. This is why people who've completed their awakening often seem to be just beginning something entirely new. They're not resting on their spiritual achievements. They're using their integrated awareness as a foundation for deeper service, creativity, and love. The question that emerges isn't, am I awakened? But rather, how is consciousness wanting to express and explore itself through this life today? And that question never gets old, never gets answered once and for all. It keeps you perpetually fresh, perpetually curious, perpetually alive. What if the real awakening was discovering that you never needed to wake up from anything? You just needed to wake up as everything. You know what the most liberating realization is? That you were never broken in the first place. All those years of seeking, all those techniques and teachers and breakthroughs, they weren't fixing you. They were simply removing the layers of conditioning that made you forget what you already were. Jung understood something that most spiritual traditions miss. The goal isn't to become something new, but to stop pretending to be something you're not. Every meditation session, every moment of presence, every integration of shadow material was just peeling away the false identities you'd accumulated. And now you're just you, completely, unapologetically, authentically you. But here's where it gets interesting. This you that remains isn't a fixed thing. It's not like you've finally discovered your true self and now you get to be that forever. Instead, you've discovered that you're the space in which all selves arise and dissolve. You're the awareness that can be angry or peaceful, seeking or satisfied, confused or clear, without any of these states defining who you are. This is why people who've completed their awakening process often seem so ordinary and yet so extraordinary at the same time. They're not trying to maintain any particular state or identity. They're free to be completely human while remaining completely aware that their humanity is just consciousness playing dress-up. The beautiful paradox is that when you stop trying to awaken, you discover you were never asleep. When you stop trying to find yourself, you realize you were never lost. When you stop trying to become conscious, you recognize that consciousness is all there ever was. So where does this leave you? Right here, right now, exactly as you are, not as a project to be completed, but as life expressing itself perfectly through your unique perspective. The seeking may be over, but the living is just beginning. And maybe that's the most radical awakening of all, discovering that ordinary life, lived with full awareness, is the most extraordinary miracle there is.